So this is Valentine's Day weekend. Folks wouldn't know that. It's a momentous weekend in my life. I came out Valentine's Day weekend many, many, many years ago, and it's a weekend in which we're often thinking about not just our romantic connections, but our connections to other people in general. And what does it mean to be in close friendship with others? What does it mean to be in close, meaningful relationship of any kind with others? And it's often a time that can create longing in us if we feel like we don't have close connections in our lives. And it's a time where if we do have those close connections, we can notice that and feel a lot of love and gratitude. And so, in recognizing that these are the complexities that Valentine's Day weekend often evokes, either the longing for that connection and closeness or the meaning we find in it and holding that gratitude in our lives, in ourself. And I wanted to then shift into a brief amount of just a brief few moments of reflection together on what had been the planned topic for today. We're going to have a little bit more conversation and dialogue in a bit. Um, so, yeah, stay tuned for that. But our planned topic for today was inspired by a couple of articles in the Atlantic, which is a great magazine. And I want to share these in case they're of interest. You could write these down and look them up later. One is called The Antisocial Century. This is by Derek Thompson of The Atlantic, and this was January of 2025, so very recent. But The Atlantic has kind of reported on this topic before. Derek Thompson had an article on this as well in February of 24, Why Americans Suddenly Stopped Hanging Out. The New York Times, where's the New York Times one? It's here. Yep, their article is called A Nation of Homebodies. This is from October of 24. And WBUR, Boston Public Radio, did a podcast and article about this in February, February of 24, entitled Americans Don't Socialize Face-to-Face as Much as They Used to. So the Atlantic gave this very provocative title of the antisocial century, marking in that a trend that is being documented and that it's specific to the 2000s, the century that we're in. To give some context, and there's the writing on this is just really beautiful and meaningful. If you're interested in this topic, it's worth reading more. Our nation was known as a kind of a highly social nation of extroverts, pretty much from its founding. And that makes sense if you think about it. That if folks, the settlers that came over here, to the United States, have left extended family and home behind, and you have to build up social networks. So from the inception of our country, there was that kind of tradition of building up networks of social connection. This is captured in kind of the movement is called associationalism. We, by the way, are a big part of this, which I'll say more about in just a few seconds. And this trend or pattern of through voluntary association, building up networks of community was so notable that when Alexis de Tocqueville visited the United States, it was one of his primary observations about US culture and society. He said there were thousands of different types of voluntary associations, and this is a direct quote from de Tocqueville, nothing in my view deserves more attention than the intellectual and moral associations in the United States. So he thought it was just such a fundamental part of our culture and our society. And this remained true through the 19th century and mostly through the 20th century. And during that time period, I mentioned that we Unitarian Universalists are an important part of this. So religious association was indeed a part of the voluntary formation of community from the beginning here. And within that, the particular form that was called associationalism, a theology developed around that as well, around democratic community and how we've chosen to be together and what it means to be of mutual support to one another through voluntary choice. The formative Unitarian Universalist theologian in this regard is James Luther Adams. His writings on associationalism as the foundation of who we are as Unitarian Universalists It is rich, it is accessible, it is beautiful writing. Um, yeah. So we are part of that. And by the way, for those, some of us know this, but others may not, we informally use the language of denomination in talking about Unitarian Universalism. That's technically incorrect. We are part of the associational movement, and so our national organization is called an association, which is to emphasize the voluntary nature of it, that we are choosing voluntarily to be in community with others. The national kind of framework or form of organization mirrors our local frame of organizing, how we're together locally. Same is true for us locally. We don't take attendance, we don't force people to attend, it's all voluntary, and it's the same replicated model at the national level. Okay, so associationalism, James, Luther, and Adams. Now, what happens is towards the end of the 20th century, there are sharp changes to this. How Americans are kind of gathering voluntarily begins to change. And the first significant noticer or writer about this is a guy named Robert Putnam. He published a study in 1995. At the time, it was just an article entitled Bowling Alone, America's Declining Social Capital. And 5 years later, in the year 2000, the article got expanded and became a book. There's now a book published in around 2000. I think there are more recent editions than the 2000 edition, but it was initially published in 2000, and it was an expansion of his study of America's declining social connection. Now, here's the interesting thing. Robert Putnam was worried about this in 1995, that our social connections with one another are declining, our voluntary connections with one another are declining. From the year 2000 onward, it's fallen off a cliff. And the pandemic years of like 2019, 2020 hugely accelerated and exacerbated the trend. So I want to give you a little bit of a flavor of what some of these trends mean and look like. So first off, it was already the case. I think these are figures from, yeah, these are figures over the past 20 or so years. There was already, by the year 2000, a significant portion of folks were already uh, uh, taking part in religious services, religious institutions online. And that number over the past 20 to 22 or 3 years, it's gone up by 35% in 2 decades. And the current number is like something close to 60% of people in the United States are engaging in religious life online in some way, shape, or form. That's a huge change in just 2 decades, something like 60%. By the way, the data that folks draw on, this includes, I believe, Robert Putnam, and then the Atlantic writer whose name is Derek Thompson. There's a study called the American Time Use Study. And so it helps people track over years and decades how our use of our free time has changed. So religious life is one of them for sure. It's one of the most significant areas of change. But what they also found is that time being spent alone, particularly for teens, so teens in particular, and then older adults, that it has significantly increased. And to the point where there are mental health crises at both ages of those age spectrums, with teenagers and with older adults. And the mental health crises around loneliness are paralleling the amount of time that teens and older adults are spending by themselves. What the study shows about teens is stark. So I want to share with you the statistic if I can. Here it is. So in the past 20 or so years, adults in the United States are spending 30% less time doing face-to-face socializing than just like in the year 2000, the year 2000 and today. For teenagers, that number is between 45% and 50% less time doing face-to-face socializing with peers. That's a significant drop, particularly for teenagers, at a time when one of the things you're learning how to do is be socialized and have friendships, making mistakes, dating, all that kind of stuff. So these are very significant changes in the patterns of life of our nation. Now, have noticed this about myself. I began noticing this it just simply in the pre-pandemic to now. Pre-pandemic, we were often having people over for dinner or meeting people out for dinner, and I have noticed how my own family's patterns of socializing have changed since the pandemic. We are doing less of that and choosing more time either together as a family or time at home. Now, this leads to a whole like interesting little conversation or discussion like aloneness and solitude aren't necessarily a bad thing. This is one of the things the pandemic showed us. It forced or imposed a lot of solitude on us, and a lot of us discovered that we like solitude. That solitude can be a positive thing. So this too became part of what was studied, and what they found is that we're actually as citizens of the United States, we are spending the most time by ourselves that we ever had. By the way, this includes what we might term family time, meaning like the family might be at home, but people are in separate rooms by themselves. Um, so it's not actually family time per se doing a family activity. It's like parallel stuff in the same house, in the same household. Um, yeah, that amount of time has like significantly increased our alone time. Now, it could be solitude. We know solitude is a healthy thing, like having some time by yourself to reflect, to be in nature, whatever it is. What they have found and here's the direct quote I want to share with you. Yeah, well, first I'll tell you the stat, what they discovered. We're not spending time in solitude, in reflection, out necessarily out in nature, communing with nature. We are spending time by ourselves, including what we might call ostensibly family time, but in separate rooms in the same house or same building. We're spending time are being on screens. So our amount of screen time has gone up dramatically, like huge. Our amount of time, it's either televisions or cell phones. Those are the top two reported things. And the time on televisions and cell phones has replaced time by oneself, by the way, not even necessarily watching the television or being on a cell phone with other people parallel next to you or whatever, watching a show together with a spouse or family member, but by yourself. That amount of time has dramatically increased. And what Derek Thompson says about this in one of the articles I mentioned, we're not trading dining at a restaurant for hosting people for dinner at home. We're simply more at home alone by yourself. And what the trend shows is that that time alone by ourselves is going to television and cell phone screening or scrolling, and that we have a mental health crisis with teens and older adults in particular. So herein was the thing, like, on a weekend when we consider the topic of love and our connection to others, it felt like an important wondering. I have wondered this myself. The pandemic showed me that solitude is meaningful and that I enjoy my time away from other people. How do we know if we're doing too much of that? How do we know if we should be pushing ourselves to be a bit more social because it would be good for our mental health and our overall well-being to actually be socializing and engaging with others? And I don't know that I have an answer to that. I think that I may be figuring that out myself too. Of course, I'm in a highly social vocation. I'm around people all the time, but the type of social connection that these writers and sociologists are talking about is meaningful connection with others, where we feel deeply connected with another human being. That kind of time is becoming scarce in American society. And I think that's worth kind of just being aware of and holding in our awareness and inviting reflection around in our own individual lives. What does that look like? So if we'd been together in the sanctuary today, one of the things we were going to invite folks to do is intentionally turn to a neighbor, say hello, greet somebody, take a few moments for in-person interaction, the thing that is becoming rarer in American society. We're here on Zoom. We've already done a little bit of that greeting. And so I'm gonna invite you to hold the question. And you could, if you wanted to take a little note or write it down, you could. What does solitude mean for you? That's meaningful alone time. And how would you know if you're doing too much solitude? I think that's worth kind of just holding as a question. How would you know? Okay, now we're gonna transition a little bit into some shared spiritual practice, and there's more to come. And the shared spiritual practice I'm going to invite us into is just a couple of moments of meditative silence. And here's what I'm going to invite around this. Some of us are familiar with meditative practice. For others, it's a kind of a totally new thing for us. If it is, it's fine. My kind of guidance there is you're not looking for the mind to go quiet. One of my meditation teachers would say your mind only stops thinking when you're deceased, and nobody's in a rush to get to that point. So your mind will be thinking, and that's okay that it's thinking. But we can use the silence to notice the thoughts. And often one of the things that can be most helpful is to interrogate a little bit, like, why does my mind keep coming back to this set of thoughts? What's important about that? Why am I noticing this? Why is this the first couple of things that are coming up? Am I anxious about something? Am I concerned about something? Are there broader things in my life or my day that are needing my attention in a particular way? This is a great opportunity to simply notice what naturally arises, and what's on our heart, what's on our soul, what's on our spirit, so to speak. And so I'm going to invite us into a couple of minutes of shared meditative silence. I'm intentionally inviting you to notice your thinking and to interrogate your thinking a little bit. Like, what are you about? The thought came up, but why? Why are you coming up? All right. Meditation, I practice in the Tibetan Shambhala tradition. We keep our eyes open and our gaze soft. So if you would, I invite you to join me in a time of silence. That was a very short 3 minutes. Typically, if we're in a proper meditation practice, it's like 20 to 25 minutes is considered kind of minimal, the minimum amount we would do. So that was just a couple of minutes. Now, having spent a little bit of time just noticing your thoughts, grab that pen, paper, journal that's near you. Just take a couple of quick bullet point notes. What was coming up? What did you notice about your thoughts? What is your heart, spirit, mind preoccupied with or thinking about? Take just a minute and do some quick bullet points. Okay. Now here's the fun. I wanted to do something a little experimental today, and I wanted to wait to share what that is. Years ago, this is yeah before I think it was before Jeff and I and the family moved to Michigan. I visited Sedona, Arizona. I'm sure some of you have been to Sedona. I love the desert. That was partly why I went. Ultimately, Sedona's not quite my speed, and it's okay if it's yours. It probably wasn't personally mine. But while I was there, I got to visit. We have sibling social justice activists like us in a different movement called religious movement called the Unity Movement. And the Unity Movement, I don't think we have a local Unity church or congregation, but they're kind of considered metaphysically oriented and nominally Christian in the way that our contemplative friends in the Quaker tradition are nominally Christian. So Christian in kind of that more looser affiliation, but Christian nonetheless, and metaphysically oriented. And their most famous, one of their more famous congregations is there in Sedona. And the leader of that congregation is a little bit of a celebrity in the Unity movement. So I went to visit and I worshiped with them that morning. And a lot of it was familiar and things that we would also do in Unitarian Universalism. But when you got to the sermon, the leader of the church at that time, I think he's still there. His name's Michael Murdad, Reverend Michael Murdad. He got up and he just said to the community that was gathered, "What's on your heart? What's on your spirit? What's on your mind today?" And people just shouted out a few things. Well, maybe half a dozen or more things. And he took some notes around what people were shouting out and saying is on their heart or on their mind and their spirit. And he crafted the sermon or reflection right then or there, weaving together the themes that spoke to some of the things that community members were telling them were actually on their hearts and minds. I love this. And if you've attended a question box service that I have led in our community, this is not dissimilar than a question box service. And in fact, it's less structured and even more relational than the formality of slipping something into a box and it's anonymously drawn. I kind of loved it. I have wanted to try something like this for eons, and I haven't quite known how to try it as an experiment in Unitarian Universalism. And lo and behold, here we are, and we have Snow Day. And I thought, this is a great opportunity to invite you to share what's on your heart, what's on your mind, what's on your spirit, whatever of that framing works for you. You just engaged in an intentional reflective practice, which pointed to some of the things that are naturally arising for you, that are coming up, that you're thinking about. So I wanted to invite you to take a few minutes, and if you be brave enough, put in the chat some of what's on your heart and your mind. Ideally connected to the reflective practice you just participated in. And if not, you could also just more broadly think of what's on your heart and mind and spirit and put that in the chat. So I'll say, while we are doing that, I'll say another word about the unity movement's kind of metaphysical orientation. In that kind of metaphysical orientation of their community, they believe that every moment is the sacred and holy, whatever we want to consider that. It can even be just the intention of love moving among us, and it could be the spirit of the universe or holy or God, whatever you want to call it, that each moment is holy and sacred, and that energy and spirit is constantly moving around us. And we can trust that. We can trust that that spirit is always at work and always in movement. And the right things that a community needs to reflect on will emerge organically in the moment as people are sharing what's on their heart, mind, and spirit. And so we in that tradition, what they're doing is intentionally bringing alive that coming together and the trusting of collective heart, mind, and spirit. I found it to be really beautiful. So it's, like I said, like our question box approach, sermon approach, even more organic. And there is a theology underpinning it, which I found to be quite interesting in people, a theology of trust and community. Okay, I'm going to read a little bit of the chat and see what's kind of coming up. Thank you all for being brave and participating in my experiment. I'll read some of these out loud. Gentleness with oneself, cultural, political decline and division, local community, a song, never too much, another affirmation of local community, loving kindness, the busyness of life these days, peace found walking in the woods, political violence, struggling with feelings of vulnerability but wanting to connect with others, being forced to slow down in the snow, but there's a busy week ahead. The beauty of snow, the quietness of the world, especially in the morning. Concern about the state of our federal government. Thinking about the importance of time for reflection and connection. Life changes. The feeling that you need to be doing something. That urge for productivity. Managing the unfairness of life. Physical body and the tension. Adjustments in aging. the practice of being in community with others and looking at oneself clearly, work and safety, vulnerability with the environment, planning for the future, wanting to be a visible ally to impacted communities like the LGBTQIA plus community, the difference between loneliness and solitude. Solitude can be a source of strength. Distant friends, dogs on the couch, busy mind, needing time alone, and the distinction between loneliness and aloneness, connection, interaction. Yeah, this is echoing some themes that were definitely a part of our question box. There's more that could be read there. This is echoing themes that were a part of our question box service, I think a month or maybe 6 weeks ago or something, like 6 or 8 weeks ago. Yeah, the political time we are in is provoking anxiety, frustration, anger for many of us. That is absolutely a reality. And uncertainty and fear. Yeah, you can't forget those. Those are really challenging energies to be around for extended periods of time. And this administration has kind of just begun. And so we've got years, to get through still of this kind of uncertainty, this kind of potential frustration. So, being cognizant that we have to manage our energy for the long haul. This is one of the reasons why in activist circles and in social justice organizing circles, somatic practice is becoming something that is really deeply focused on and talked about. And one of the things I've grown to appreciate as I've grown older is that our formal systems of education don't always teach us about how to be well, first off, how to be in relationship. What does healthy relationship look like? What does healthy communication look like? It's not usually an explicit part of curriculum that we spend years and years of our life in learning. In fact, the things that we are often assessed on are reading and mathematics skills and things like that. But our relational skills are not typically formally assessed. In fact, we rely on an implicit curriculum to teach us one of life's most important skills. How are we in healthy, meaningful relationship with others? Similarly, our formal systems of education don't teach us explicitly how to be in relationship with our bodies. And we are embodied beings. And particularly as the body goes through changes, the body will demand that we pay attention to it and notice it. But hopefully we can begin to have a deeper relationship with our physicalities, our physical bodies, well before our body makes it absolutely a necessity. We have no other choice but to pay attention to our bodies. And here's why. Here's why that matters. All these external circumstances, right now it's the thing first and foremost is the political civic climate in our nation. But if it wasn't that, it could be family related stress. It could be relationship related stress. It could be work related stress, our work environment, whatever. There are all kinds of things that can provoke anxiety, fear, uncertainty in our lives. It's not just the civic political framework and developments, and we know this. And so when we're going through anxiety, stress, fear, whatever, all those emotions, frustration, anger, disappointment, they stay on in our bodies. We can't only think our way out of those experiences or talk our way out of those experiences. And so one of the things, for example, I've worked at times with ministers in formation, ministerial interns. And one of the things I've always said to ministers in training is that we must pay attention to our emotional and spiritual lives, and we must pay attention to our physicality, our physical bodies as well. And if we don't, we're not really being holistic. So it's mind, body, and spirit. That's the shorthand for that. And all three kind of equally matter, and we need to be paying attention to them. On the physical side, it's, how are we releasing the harsher energies of anger and frustration? I do that through boxing. I used to do it through running. There's a lot of ways, a lot of physical activities that activate the body, and the activation can be a releasing of harder energies. And then the slowing down energies of the body, of listening and paying attention and being aware, present too, that can help us get in touch with grief, with sadness, with anxiety, with other experiences that are also held in the body. So learning to expel energy from release energy from our body and learning to be fully present to other energies with our body. It takes practice. And the only way to practice it is to actually do it. Now, these are some of the things that solitude can support. When, if I'm running by myself outside, I'm doing that by myself. That is a form of solitude. I can get in connected to some of those things that I know my body is holding and that I want to release. If I'm out on a hike in nature by myself, I can be, again, in relationship to my inner life as I'm doing that, and utilize the beauty of nature as inspiration, but also connect that to the inner realities that I'm trying to work with, body, mind, and spirit. So there's a variety of ways that, these somatic practices, body-based practices can connect with solitude, and taken as, and with our emotional lives, and then taken as whole, they are replenishing. They help us. They fortify us for going back out into the world, in doing difficult things with our lives, and showing up as social justice activists or committed parents, committed workers in our workplaces, whatever that might be. Now, I saw a little bit of the wrestling between wanting connection and solitude, and I think, I sense that some of us are not sure about that also. I'm not. I'm not totally clear when what my brain is telling me is solitude is not actually solitude, and it's isolation. There have been times post-pandemic that I've gotten social invitations, and I'm like, oh, but it's a hassle. Or it's a meetup of people I know socially. And it's like, but it's a meetup. It's not just a small thing of like two couples getting together or something like that. Nobody's going to miss me if I don't show up for a meetup. And I can come up with all kinds of excuses. I've had a tough week. I want to just be by myself. But what I may be doing is missing out on an opportunity for social connection that could also bolster my mental health. And what a beautiful thing that we have our Plan for Sundays, which is one place where we can find social connection. I hope meaningful social connection. Okay, so I'm like, there's a lot of messages here. I can't read them all. I'm scrolling a little bit. Yeah, fears coming up. I think my computer took me to the very last little message here. I scroll back up there. Yeah. Yeah, the difference between solitude and isolation. It is a difference. Yeah, isolation, if we're doing isolation, that is actually quite harmful for our mental health. It is not a positive thing. And I think that that's something each of us is just going to we have to ponder for ourselves is, are we doing solitude or are we doing isolation? Yeah, I'm not, my cursor's not able to move through the chat. Sorry. I was able to read a bunch of it. Oh, there it is. It's moving again. Okay. Yeah, losses. Yep. Scared for the future. Yeah. Yeah, and particularly for those of us that we have a bunch of folks here who work with our teens. This is a good thing for us to be aware of with our teens, the level of isolation that teens are facing in their lives today, and also our elders. We know that those are the two populations where there's a mental health crisis around loneliness. All right, with that, these are our kind of reflections and our little bit of sharing today. Thank you for joining me in the little experiment of sharing what's in your heart, what's on your mind today. I want to invite you to just join me in a quick centering breath as we shift energies and prepare to like close out our time together today. If you join me in a centering breath to help shift our energy a little bit. I want to invite you to go forth and in the rest of your day today, let it be relaxed. Let it be a slower pace, and know that you're held in the warmth, embrace, and the love and care of this beautiful community. You need not be alone, even if we are in our homes on a snowy, cold Sunday by ourselves. You are held in the warm embrace, in the love of community. Until we're together again physically, and those who are in Ann Arbor and able to do so, we'll be back to our regular timings and in-person services next Sunday. For now, go in love and peace. I love each of you dearly. Have a beautiful Sunday and week ahead, and we'll look forward to being together again soon. Be well.